of introduction about our very special guest, Jay McInerney. He burst onto the literary scene in 1984 at age 29, when Vintage Books published his debut novel, Bright Lights, Big City, in a paperback edition. It employed a fresh, sardonic, and laceratingly funny second-person narrator, became an iconic narrative of 20-somethings run amok in Manhattan in the 1980s. The novel captured with pitch-perfect prose the cocaine-fueled, club-hopping, hard-partying zeitgeist of the 80s. The New York Times wrote this: "This is the echo of New York, all right. And if you have a love affair with it, you'll recognize the truth in Mr. McInerney's landscapes." It was later turned into a major motion picture starring Michael J. Fox with a screenplay by Jay McInerney. And the author became an overnight celebrity and a frequent bold-faced denizen of the New York Post page 6 gossip column. Mr. McInerney went on to publish many books that displayed the versatility of his craft: journalism, screenplays, criticism, and more fiction. By my count, he's published 8 novels, 2 short story collections, and 3 books on wine. He's been the wine critic for House and Garden, Wall Street Journal, and Town and Country. In a brief pause, Jen passed me this note. This is important. Someone left their lights on. We have a white Toyota, I'm sorry, Jen, I forgot, DRA8464. That's the lucky number. If that's you, your lights are on. You don't want a dead battery when you go out tonight. Yes. Bright light, small city, or dark light, small city. Anyway, but among his many awards, you want to tune in for this. He was named a literary lion by the New York Public Library. And according to his website bio, he snorted cocaine in the bathroom at the ceremony with fellow honoree Hunter Thompson. We might hear more about that. So this will be an amazing time tonight at the Linda, especially since the conversation is in the hands of the best interviewer on the planet. Let's give him a round of applause, our own Joe Donahue. So very briefly, before we invite them up here and I can get off the stage, we booked this event to mark the 40th anniversary, 40 years, celebrating Bright Lights, Big City. It also coincides with the author's recent 70th birthday. Now, McInerney still gets written up in page 6, which claims to have the exclusive on the party hosted by his wife, Ann Hurst, at La Bernardine in Manhattan. And I quote, the Post said there were 80 guests who were served, quote, 8 rare vintages in giant 6-liter bottles from his own wine cellar to accompany the 5-course dinner by 3 Michelin-starred chef Eric Ripert. And page 6, I'm glad to report, still refers to the author as the enfant terrible. I think I have that right. Please welcome to the stage Jay McInerney and Joe Donahue.
It's really nice to see you. Thank you. I came armed. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the...
And I'm not sure if I believe everything that was just said, but...
Well, if not you, who? First of all, welcome to the Linda. How many of you is this the first time at the Linda? Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations. Well, welcome. Welcome to the Linda. And it's our performing arts studio. And we have a fun drive coming up next week. How are you?
Well, I'm great, and I think this is definitely my first time at the Linda. But I just want to say I've had a fairly long association with the New York State Writers Institute and with Albany, and that's all thanks to my friend Bill Kennedy, who's one of the great institutions of American literature, and who is here with us tonight in the front row, appropriately. But anyway, Bill is such a great writer, and he's been really kind and helpful to me in my career. So thanks for coming, Bill.
Very nice to see Bill, as always. When you say that, a very kind in your career, of what is that like to to get support from other writers?
Well, you know, I was very fortunate when I first published Bright Lights Big City, which was now 40 years ago apparently. There were a lot, you know, it was somewhat controversial, you know. I mean, there were a lot of critics who said, you know, this is not appropriate to, you know, this is not high literature to be writing about nightclubs and cocaine in New York City and young people, and you know, there was a certain amount of opposition to what I was doing, but I have to say that what really bucked me up was there were writers like Bill Kennedy and Gay Talese and Norman Mailer, and you know, more established writers who were, you know, who told me, yeah, you're okay, you're one of us. Keep on keeping on, and you know, sometimes when I was feeling that I was very embattled, I just thought, hey, yeah, but these guys are my friends, and I'm having drinks with Bill Kennedy, and we're talking about Hemingway and Fitzgerald, you know, and so I mean that was really important.
When you started, we know that the 40 years for the book, and at what point you were 29? How old when you started to think of it and start to write it and think, okay, this is something that I want to do?
That's a good question, actually. So
I'm full of them.
For a number of years, I gather, for a number of years, I was trying to write this expatriate novel that I lived in Japan for 2 years after I graduated from Williams, and I was struggling with this expatriate novel. It's sort of in the spirit of Robert Stone and Paul Theroux, and I just wasn't quite making it work. And I remember Gordon Lish writing me. Gordon Lish is a very famous editor, but he wrote me a letter when he rejected one of my short stories, and he said, "God damn it, Jay, just really write about what hurts you." And he said that the best thing that can happen to you as a writer is the worst thing that can happen to you as a person. That doesn't kill you, of course, and it just so happened that at that time, I had just moved to Syracuse to study with Raymond Carver because I had been fired as a fact checker at the New Yorker for being a really bad fact checker, and my wife, who was a fashion model, had left me for an Italian photographer. And my mother had died, so all in the space of a year. So this is pretty much the three worst things that I can think of that can happen to a young man. And so I put aside this novel that I was writing, and I sat down to write about this terrible period in my life. And I wrote the first draft in 6 weeks, and for some reason, I wrote it in the second person. Actually, I know I wrote it in the second person because I had submitted part of this Japanese novel to George Plimpton at the Paris Review, and he had written me back and said he liked my story, but did I have anything else? So I quickly rifled through my desk in Syracuse, I realized everything I had was like, I had my Ann Beattie short story, I had my Robert Stone short story, I had my Raymond Carver short stories. I had all this stuff, but it was all derivative and not very good. But I had this scrap of paper that I had written after being out at a nightclub all night in New York, and coming home more or less in despair. And the scrap of paper said, "You're not the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning, but here you are," and so on. And I thought, wow, that's maybe the only original thing that I've ever written. So then I proceeded to sit down and that night, and I wrote another 12 pages of that. And I remember being in the nightclub and looking at myself in the mirror and saying those words, and I thought, oh, wow, apparently we speak to ourselves in the second person. And so 6 months later, I found the scrap of paper, and I wrote what became my very first published short story in the Paris Review. And then I decided to keep going with it. And in short order, that became Bright Lights, Big City. And my best friend and editor at the time, I told him I was writing a novel that summer, and he said, well, I hope to God it isn't in the second person. And it almost stopped me cold. But I went back, and I rewrote a chapter in the first person and the third person, and all the fun kind of drained out, all the self-consciousness and the humor kind of drained out of it. So I just thought, what the hell, I'm going to go with it. And if you look at it, there are not many novels in English written in the second person. There's a few.
Which I thought was fascinating. I think is fascinating because, well, you do it to such great effect. It's a fascinating and very revealing way to tell a story.
Well, one thing I can tell you is that you can't sustain it for 500 pages. But I think this captured, first of all, the self-consciousness of a guy who was like high half of the time. And secondly, it captured an interior monologue. You know, when you look in the mirror, you don't say, I idiot, you say, you idiot, when you're looking at yourself. And I don't think that's been recognized all that often. And I remember subsequently Laurie Moore wrote some pretty good, some very good stories in the second person in a book called Self-Help, which I reviewed for the New York Times. But honestly, when I wrote Bright Lights, I couldn't really think of any precedents, but something about this passage made me feel like I should just keep going with it.
So, a couple follow-up questions.
Yeah.
One is, you write it, the first draft in 6 weeks. That's very fast.
It is, yeah.
How much time had passed since the loss of your job, the loss of your mother? How much time had gone by?
About 2 years. About 2 years.
Was-
And for a while, it just seemed to me like you don't write about these horrible things. And as I say, there's something about Gordon Lish saying this to me, like write about what hurts you the most, you know. And I think that's true. I think Hemingway said something very similar. But I just thought, well, yeah, I'm really hurting. Maybe I should work from this.
But did you know, you knew you were hurting. Did you know what was hurting you?
Yeah. I mean, I was lonely. My mom was dead. And I had this incredibly prestigious job at the New Yorker, which I just totally screwed up, you know. I mean, I was a bad fact checker. But, you know, I never wanted to be a fact checker. I wanted to have my stories published in the New Yorker, but I don't want to be a fact checker. I mean, facts have never been my primary interest.
So what was your, let's say, your state while you're writing the novel? Are you still living the life that you were ultimately
No.
writing about?
I was not living that life. I was living in Syracuse, New York, with a new girlfriend, and I was studying fiction with Raymond Carver and Tobias Wolff, two really great writers. But this all happened in the summer, so for some reason, I didn't show any of this stuff to my workshop, to my, horrible fellow students who would have ripped it apart anyway. I just sat down in June when I finished my Syracuse workshop duties, and I just let it rip. And I think that's what everybody hopes for when they, if you're a writer, you hope that the story dictates itself, and that you just sit there as an amanuensis, and that's kind of what I felt with this story.
Were you surprised by it, about what it told you?
Yeah, I think I was surprised because I just felt like there was. I'm sorry, this. When I hear this sort of shit, it sounds like a cliche, but I did feel like I was hearing a voice that was better than my own voice, and that I was just taking it down. So yeah, I was surprised.
What do you think made that voice better? What do you think allowed for that voice to, for want of a better word, be unleashed?
I honestly think, and I've written this in the New York Times book review about young writers in their 20s, but I think there's a music of the spheres that you hear at a certain age that you're not going to hear again. And when I read this book, I'm sometimes really amazed, and I think, wow, there's no way I could ever do that again, And by the way, it's not as if it's not as if I'm not wiser now and much better read than I was then, but I sort of feel like there's something in your 20s. There's some feeling you have about the endless possibilities of life that you will lose sometime between the age of 30 and 35 or whatever, and for me, I'm really glad that I caught that particular moment.
Jay McInerney is our guest. The name of the book, of course, Bright Lights, Big City, celebrating its 40th anniversary. I mean, the thing that is amazing to me, I mean, not only that it's been 40 years, which I don't want to reckon with, but okay.
Me neither.
But
Me neither.
yeah, I'm sure many of us feel that way in this room. But the book is still incredible. It's still amazing. It's still powerful and very revealing, and in its way beautiful.
It's funny. I think it was Donna Karan who she wanted to use one line from the book, allegedly from the book, in some advertising campaign. She was going to pay me a lot of money. And it was weird because the line sounded vaguely familiar, but I just thought, I don't remember this in Bright Lights, Big City. So I sat down and I read the whole book. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't take that long. But, and the line wasn't there. And it turned out that the line was from the screenplay, which I'd also written, so that was okay. Eventually, we figured that out. But I must say, rereading the book after, I hadn't looked at it in 20 years, and I thought, wow, that's, I'm really happy I wrote that, and I definitely couldn't write that again at my age.
Would you mind reading
No,
for us?
I'll read a little.
This is from the beginning of the novel.
Read a little from Bright Lights, and yeah. But as I say, I haven't read this in a long time, and
it's really good.
Until recently, I hadn't looked at it in a long time, but I'm not embarrassed to have written this. This is from the first chapter. It's 6 a.m. Do you know where you are? You're not the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning. But here you are, and you cannot say that the terrain is entirely unfamiliar, although the details are fuzzy. You're at a nightclub, talking to a girl with a shaved head. The club is either Heartbreak or the Lizard Lounge. All might come clear if you could just slip into the bathroom and do a little more Bolivian marching patter. Then again, it might not. A small voice inside of you insists that this epidemic lack of clarity is a result of too much of that already. The night has already turned on that pivot where 2 a.m. changes to 6 a.m. You know this moment has come and gone, but you are not yet willing to concede that you have crossed the line beyond which all is gratuitous damage and the palsy of unraveled nerve endings. Somewhere back there, you could have cut your losses, but you rode past that moment on a comet trail of white powder, and now you're trying to hang on to the rush. Your brain at this moment is composed of brigades of tiny Bolivian soldiers. They are tired and muddy from their long march through the night. There are holes in their boots, and they are hungry. They need to be fed. They need the Bolivian marching powder. A vaguely tribal flavor to this scene, pendulous jewelry, face paint, ceremonial headgear, and hairstyles. You feel that there is also a certain Latin theme, something more than the piranhas cruising your bloodstream and the fading buzz of marimbas in your brain. You are leaning back against a post that may or may not be structural with regard to the building, but which feels essential to your own maintenance of an upright position. The bald girl is saying this used to be a good place before the assholes discovered it. You don't want to be talking to this bald girl or even listening to her, which is all you're doing, but just now you do not want to test the powers of speech or locomotion. How did you get here? It was your friend, Tad Allagash, who powered you in here, and he has disappeared. Tad is the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning. He is either your best self or your worst self. You're not sure which. Earlier in the evening, it seemed clear that he was your best self. You started on the Upper East Side with champagne and unlimited prospects, strictly observing the Allagash rule of perpetual motion, 1 drink per stop. Tad's mission in life is to have more fun than anyone else in New York City, and this involves a lot of moving around since there is always the likelihood that where you aren't is more fun than where you are. You are awed by his strict refusal to acknowledge any goal higher than the pursuit of pleasure. You want to be like that. You also think he's shallow and dangerous. His friends are all rich and spoiled, like the cousin from Memphis you met earlier in the evening, who would not accompany you below 14th Street because, he said, he didn't have a low-life visa. This cousin had a girlfriend with cheekbones to break your heart, and you knew she was the real thing when she steadfastly refused to acknowledge your presence. She possessed secrets about islands, about horses, about French pronunciation that you would never know. You have traveled in the course of the night from the meticulous to the slime. The girl with the shaved head has a scar tattooed on her scalp. It looks like a long sutured gash. You tell her it is very realistic. She takes this as a compliment and thanks you. You meant as opposed to romantic. I could use one of those right over my heart, you say. You want to give you the name of the guy that did it, she says. You'd be surprised how cheap. You don't tell her that nothing would surprise you now. Her voice, for instance, which is like the New Jersey state anthem played through an electric shaver. The bald girl is emblematic of the problem. The problem is, for some reason, you think you're going to meet the kind of girl who's not the kind of girl who'd be at a place like this at this time of the morning. When you meet her, you're going to tell her that what you really want is a house in the country with a garden. New York, the club scene, bald women, you're tired of all that. Your presence here is only a matter of conducting an experiment in limits, reminding yourself of what you aren't. You see yourself as the kind of guy who wakes up early on Sunday morning and steps out to cop the Times and croissants, who might take a cue from the arts and leisure section and decide to check out an exhibition. Costumes of the Habsburg court at the Met, say, or Japanese lacquerware of the Muromachi period at the Asia Society. The kind of guy who called up the woman he met at a publishing party Friday night, the party he did not get sloppy drunk at, see if she wants to check out the exhibition and maybe do an early dinner. A guy who would wait until 11 to call her because she might not be an early riser like you are. She may have been out late, perhaps at a nightclub. And maybe a couple of sets of tennis before the museum. He wonders if she plays, but of course she would. When you meet the girl who wouldn't, etc., you will tell her that you are slumming, visiting your own 6 a.m. Lower East Side of the soul on a lark, stepping nimbly between the piles of garbage to the gay marimba rhythms in your head. Well, no, not gay, but you will know exactly what you mean. On the other hand, almost any girl, specifically one with a full head of hair, would help you to stave off this creeping sense of mortality. You remember the Bolivian marching patter and realize you're not down yet. No way, Jose, but first you have to get rid of the bald girl.
Jay McInerney reading from
But
Bright Lights, Big City.
Some of that is a little politically incorrect, but
Well, you
But
wrote
now-
it in a politically incorrect time, right?
yes, oh yes, indeed.
So
We didn't know what that term meant back then.
when the book comes out, how does life change?
My life changed pretty radically, pretty quickly. It was published, as you mentioned, or David mentioned, as a softcover, and I was very upset when I learned that it would not be a hardcover like Hemingway and Fitzgerald and everybody else. But my publisher, my editor, was my best friend at the time, said to me, look, man, you're going to reach a lot more people. And he had just started this series called Vintage Contemporaries.
Yeah.
And so we published it in, I think, an edition of 5,000 copies. And it sold out instantly. I mean, literally within a week. And we had not expected that. But it became this kind of word-of-mouth sensation. And unfortunately, it took 6 or 7 weeks at that time to reprint the book. So we assumed it would die, but it didn't. It just built up this sort of word-of-mouth and the demand. And my life was turned upside down. And I remember that a nightclub called the Palladium opened at that pretty much the exact time. And so my friends and I went to the opening, and there was like 2,000 people outside the door trying to get in. And I said, let's give up. And my friend, Morgan Entrigan, who's a publisher, said, no. And he went up the front of the line. He said, that's Jay McInerney out there. And suddenly these two burly bouncers come and escort us into the nightclub. And that was emblematic of how my life just completely changed after that. And suddenly I was I was a part of the cultural conversation in a way that I had not expected. All I really wanted to do with this novel was to get a teaching job. You know, I hoped for a couple of good reviews. You know, and instead I became something of a celebrity.
Did you ever get a hardcover?
Only in England did I get a
Yes.
hardcover.
Bill Kennedy asked if you ever got a hardcover, but yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Just this morning I was leaving my apartment in New York. Some guy had sent me the English hardcover
Yeah.
and asked me if I would sign it, and it included a $25 Starbucks gift certificate. So
That's not bad.
No, but you know, I was always pissed off. I just thought, how come I don't get a hardcover? On the other hand, the book has sold, you know, several million copies around the world, so I guess it's okay. And you know, I worked at Random House as a reader of slush manuscripts, you know, the stuff that would come in over the transom, for about a year before Random House published me, and I had seen, you know, these writers that I thought were pretty good writers, you know, get published in hardcover. Nothing happened. They sold 1,000 copies and died. So it was probably the right decision. I don't know. I mean, here we are, 40 years later. So I guess it's the right decision.
When did the lifestyle get in the way of the career?
Well, that undoubtedly happened. I mean, I was just flying around the world and dating models, and it probably distracted me from the business of sitting down and writing my next few novels. On the other hand, you know, I think I had more grist for my mill and more material than most guys who went off to get a teaching job had, and that was really, that was my biggest goal, was to get a teaching job, and you know, and look, and the academic life is pretty attractive, I think, in many ways, but
Not as attractive as being on the plane with the models, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I never. I mean, the only chance I ever got to experience that was, I think, was through Bill. I taught at.
You were on a plane with models, Bill?
No, I taught at Skidmore for two summers.
Oh, there you go.
I think it was the New York State Writers Institute, and you know, I still correspond with some of the students, and I think that, you know, I probably missed out on something by not being a professor, but I was for a little while. But you know, being an international playboy was pretty good too.
Yeah. What do you? There was a line that you read. They need the Bolivian marching powder. At what point did you realize you didn't need it anymore?
Well, it took a while. I stayed, you know, as several of my friends told me, I stayed at the party too long. You know, cocaine was a wonderful. You know, my first book, it was part of the subject matter, and it was wonderful to, and it was something sort of new and different in literature, and but honestly, it doesn't give back, and eventually it just takes away, and you know, I stayed at that party too long, and
Did you end it, or was it ended for you?
no, I ended it, but I had to go see a psychiatrist to end it, because I was just when I was about to, just when I would have stopped, I started dating this younger woman, and She was very into it, and it just kept going for a while. But I am happy to say that it was quite a last, 15, 20 years that I've been away from
Right.
it, and I'm really glad. By the way, and not least because people are now dying of fentanyl overdoses from doing cocaine. But I'm not. I joke about it a lot, but I'm not entirely proud of the cocaine thing because it's a pretty serious drug. But the trouble is, back in the '80s, we didn't think it was serious. We just thought it was a way to stay up later. I remember when my friends and I saw an ad in the Village Voice for Cocaine Anonymous. We thought that was the most hilarious thing we'd ever heard of. It's like, can you have too much money? Can you have too much sex? Can you have too much caviar? I mean, the idea that somebody would be addicted to cocaine seemed ridiculous to us, but psychologically, it's a very addictive drug.
So when you first go to see the psychiatrist, is it just like, we can probably save a couple appointments, here's the book?
Well, the problem for me is if you read this book, you get to the end of it and you think, okay, this guy's now going to clean up his life and he's going to be a model citizen. But the problem is that when I published this book, everywhere I went, people were handing me packets of cocaine, and people wanted to say that they had done coke with me, and
Did you like the gift basket?
I would go to Paris, and I would go into a bar, and suddenly some girl would come up and say, "Oh, here, I got some coke for you," and it was not conducive to quitting cocaine. So. Yeah, I stayed on the train too long, but on the other hand, I have to say, I've been publishing novels pretty consistently since that time, and I probably lost a year out of my life for sure.
Yeah, but you learn a lot from
I mean,
it. As you say,
adding it all up, I certainly lost. I probably lost a novel, and I'm not proud of that at all, but.
Are you proud of
but at least I got, I got a grip on it, and for better or worse, I'm always going to be associated with this book, which has a certain cocaine flavor.
How long before you stopped?
2000,
How many years?
15.
Bill's asking all the questions I wanted to ask. This is great. So 15 years?
Yeah, 15, a little more. Yeah, but
So
I have
that's
to say,
like 85 to 2000?
But I have to say that back then it was just like part of the. It was like wide shoulders. It was like. It was just part of what we did. It was everywhere. If you were in New York in a certain group of people, or L.A., or London or Paris, it was. Seriously, I would virtually land at the airport in London or Paris, or Rome, and somebody would be there with some coke. And when I would go and do readings at places, I would always get this signal, like, we got what you need, Jay.
But never the legal trouble, right?
No, I never had any legal trouble. No, thank God.
And not like
Not the only.
and not repeated rehab stints.
No, I never went to rehab, and I didn't want to go to rehab because honestly, I didn't want to stop drinking wine. So, but the 12-step program tells you that you have to stop everything if you stop anything, and I wasn't willing to do that. The only legal trouble I ever had was I was twice accused of fathering an illegitimate child, which turned out to be. The first time it happened to me, I was at a book signing, and this lawyer came up and served me with papers, and then the woman who was with him and was the pregnant woman said, "That's not him." And I'd certainly never seen her before, but there was this guy running around Boston posing as me, and he impregnated a couple of women, and at one point my brother, who lived in Massachusetts at the time, like sent me this letter saying, "How could you? You know, I can't, you know, because this guy got to some house party in Nantucket and just like, you know, basically." Ravaged the cleaning ladies and everything, but it wasn't me. but that was, I mean,
Congratulations.
but that was, you know, look, I hate to dwell on this sort of thing, but that was how crazy my life got, was that there was actually a guy who made a career out of posing as me, and apparently you can get laid that way.
You know, I find it curious because I'm interested in what are you writing today? What scratches that itch for you now?
Well, I finished a book. Well, you know, you never know when you finish a book because you finish the first draft, and I mean, for me, it's usually 3 drafts, and I submitted the 3rd draft to my publisher, I guess in September, and it was accepted in October. It's coming out about a year from now. For some reason, it really takes a long time now to publish a book. I don't know why.
Novel?
A novel, yeah. And it was funny. I hit my head, and I had a severe concussion and subdural hematoma. And for 2.5 months, I couldn't go forward with this book. I just couldn't do anything. And then after I had the brain surgery, I got back home after 7 or 8 days in the hospital, and I wrote the last 4 chapters of the book in record time, like, you know, in 10 days maybe less. And
So you had like writer's block removed.
I know. I felt like the surgeon did something good up there, you know? He adjusted something.
We had a hell of a year. So it was what, the brain and then heart.
Brain surgery, heart surgery, you know, I mean, yeah, I'm glad to
Good
glad
to be
to, glad to be
70.
here.
Yeah.
Glad to be here. I'm, yes, but, you know, I want to live as long as my friend Bill Kennedy has lived.
Absolutely.
But, what was your question? I'm sorry, I lost it.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I want to turn this over to the house here and let them ask questions of you. But no, I was asking you. My last question was about the book, and was it of how you scratched the itch of what it was. So what vein is it in? What is it a departure for you? Is it similar? Is it?
Well, no, I have to say it is the 4th installment in what is now a tetralogy, apparently, about what started as a glamorous young couple in Manhattan named Russell and Corinne Calloway and their friends.
That's great.
And until recently it was a trilogy, and now it's a tetralogy, and I can say for sure that this is the final installment. But I mean, it's weird. I know these characters really well, and I like them, and I mean, a lot of other people seem to like them, but this series of books is really a social history of Manhattan in my lifetime. You know, starting with the stock market crash of '87, going through the 9/11, going through the recession of 2008. There's always a crisis somehow there's always a crisis at the center of the book, and I'm sure you can guess what the latest one is. And let's just say 2020. You know, I mean, but I started writing it in the pandemic, but it's tough. The kind of novelist that I am, you know, I write about social scenes. I write about parties and restaurants, and and gallery openings, and all those things disappeared in 2020. So it was a real challenge to write this book, but I'm really happy with it, and it was very exciting to just get out of the hospital and just madly write for 10 hours a day, and realize that I still could, because I was afraid that I couldn't again. You know, I really was. I mean, it got to the point where before I had my surgery, my typing was so terrible. I stopped texting people because it was just hopeless. You know, it's like a series of jumbled consonants, and anyway.
You just blame that on autocorrect. Yeah. Jay McInerney is with us. He is the author of Bright Lights, Big City, celebrating its 40th anniversary. Thank you so much for talking to us. What a great pleasure to have you.
Thank
Great
you, Joe.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So we can put up the house lights, and folks can come up to this microphone right here and ask questions.
Wow,
Yes.
that's asking a lot of people to walk up there, but
to move. There's I see the force is moving some people, but nobody's gotten up yet.
I think you could also just shout a question.
Yeah, you
if
can probably
want
just
to.
shout it. Oh, here's one. We got.
Come on. From the front row. No.
Yeah, there you go.
So I want to know what you were like in college. Now, and if your professors encouraged you as a writer. Did you major in English at Williams? Tell me more about how you evolved in your younger years, especially at Williams.
Well, Williams still, I think, is you know, it's billed as a liberal arts college, and is still stridently against the idea of vocational training of any kind. You know, it's very that's just not the thing. So there was no creative writing at Williams, but I was a philosophy major, and you know, I think one of the reasons I majored in philosophy was because I realized that I would never get a job. I would never get a normal job, and that I would just have to be a writer. I mean, I was already reading an awful lot of the stuff that they taught in the English department, so I took a lot of English courses, but I didn't major in English. But I had some wonderful professors there. One of the most wonderful was a professor who he taught an entire course in Ulysses. It was every class was dedicated to one chapter of Ulysses, and we, you know, and he was brilliant. His name was Don Gifford, and he was incredible. And you know, reading Ulysses was like taking a course in novel writing, because Joyce essentially employed every technique that one could employ in telling a fictional story. And I remember one of my classmates just sat after the course. He said, "I'm never writing again. Nobody could ever repeat this." And I understand what he's saying, but I had a great experience at Williams. So I got a really good education, but it prepared me for absolutely nothing. I mean, I came out of there with a philosophy major. What am I going to do? And that was good, because I just had to start writing, and I went to Japan for a year to teach English, and then I went to Syracuse to study with Raymond Carver and Tobias Wolff, and I really wasn't. I had no practical skills, so that sort of took away my safety net. And
They recognized that you were a talented writer.
Some did, yeah, some did, and you know, I graduated summa cum laude, and you know, I was not a slacker at Williams. I mean, I had a very good experience there, but as I said, I didn't learn practical skills at all.
Writing now for the alumni newsletter. Yes.
When you were at Syracuse and learning and working with Raymond Carver, what are there some things that you still carry with you from your time there that he helped influence or brought?
Oh yeah, I mean Syracuse. Well, Carver in particular was very very influential for me. Tobias Wolff also, but you know, honestly, I have to say the workshops weren't all that instructive because all the workshop students were extremely competitive, and they would just all hasten to criticize what their fellow students had written, and but Carver used to go over my stories with a red pen and just, you know, cross out words and add other words, and I mean one thing I remember that he said, which is just indicative of many things he said, was he said to me, "Why do you use the word earth here?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You mean dirt. Why are you saying earth?" He said, that's a 50-cent word when you should be using a 25-cent word." And I mean, but that was the kind of thing that, I mean, Carver was just meticulous in his attention to language and economy of language. Tobias Wolff, on the other hand, he treated every story like, you know, a machine that could be taken apart and reassembled, and he was much more interested in structure. You know, I don't think Carver would have even known what you meant if you said structure, but Wolff would say, you know, move this part to the end, move that part to the beginning, and he was a wonderful teacher as well. I really Syracuse was a wonderful place in the early 1980s, and you know, I mean, the famous place was Iowa, but there wasn't anybody at Iowa that I really wanted to learn from the way I wanted to learn from those two guys, and I feel lucky I was there. As many of you know, the weather in Syracuse is even worse than it is here. So that lake effect snow is brutal. But I remember I used to wake up in April and suddenly say, "Wow, what's different?" And what it was sunshine, you know. So, but I learned a lot there.
Yes.
What was the Donna Karen line that you wanted to give you the big bucks for?
Oh God, I'm forgetting it now because it was from the screenplay. I'm sorry. You'll see it in some ad of hers soon. But it took me a while to find it, and I get $10,000 for it though, so it's pretty good.
Not bad at all. Did you like the movie? I mean, obviously you wrote it. You didn't like it.
I didn't like the movie at all. I supposedly I wrote the movie. I guess I did, but I knew nothing about. I didn't know that much about movies. I don't know why they thought that I. Yeah, it was part of what you said about this celebritization of my life, where they just suddenly thought I could write the screenplay since I wrote the novel. I didn't understand that much about movies, and I think also Michael J. Fox was not the right person. I love Michael, and he's a great guy, but he wasn't the right person for the role. He was coming off this movie this TV show called Family Ties, where he was this like little mini Republican, Reagan.
Alex Keaton.
Alex Keaton. Yeah, nobody wanted to see him with a Coke straw up his nose, and none of my fans wanted to see him that way. Yeah, I mean, but it was funny, I mean, so many people that I got to know after that. I mean, Alec Baldwin, Rob Lowe, Tom Cruise. I mean, so many people wanted to do that role, and somehow they picked Michael. And I mean, we had Michael and I had an amazing time making. For 2 months we went out every night. I have no idea how he got to the set at 6 a.m, as I certainly didn't. But and you know, I mean, we all know his history and what's happened to him, but he was a good actor. But one of the things I learned from Michael, or from his celebrity, was, you know, there's a type of typecasting that you just can't really overcome, you know? I mean, Michael J. Fox could never play a mass murderer. He just can't, because the public will not accept him in that role. And I don't think they totally accepted him in the role of my alter ego in Bright Lights, Big City.
What's the last question? All right.
You said that it takes you usually 3 drafts to write.
Yes.
I wonder what your first draft process is. Like free flow, you just kind of let it go, or do you have planning beforehand?
No, usually I don't know where I'm going, and I'm groping my way. You know, I interviewed E.L. Doctorow once. Very good novelist. I mean, kind of a prickly guy. I guess he came up here a couple of times, but anyway, he said to me that for him, writing a novel was like driving across country at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can go all the way that way. And usually my first draft, I don't know where I'm going. And, you know, there are friends of mine like Bret Easton Ellis or Scott Fitzgerald, who is not a friend of mine, but who outline meticulously, and then they sit down to write. And I feel like there's something a little illegitimate or weird about that. You know, it's like, if you know exactly where you're going, why bother to even write, you know? So my first draft is just this groping toward the end. And then I think the second draft is like, once I see where I've gone, then I try to line up the parts and make them, you know, my motifs suddenly, you know, I'm trying to fix them and adjust them. And then the third draft is more of a, you know, of a polish. But I don't know. I just one of the things I hate about writing screenplays is that you have to outline it before they'll even pay you. You know, you just have to write an outline. And I think there's something wonderful about improvisation and about making things up as you go along, and that's pretty much what I've always done. And I don't know. I hope you guys will read my latest and maybe enjoy it. And are we done? Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, we are. Seems like a fine place. Jay McInerney, ladies and gentlemen.